Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being with us today. We'll start webinar 2 now. I hope you can all hear me well. Welcome to the second webinar in the AMFEP-FEDIMA series on the safe handling of enzymes in the bakery supply chain. Most of you online today probably also followed our first introductory webinar on enzyme safety, which took place 2 weeks ago. If you missed it, don't worry, you can still find a recording of that first webinar on our websites. My name is Nuria Moreno, and I'm working as Regulatory Affairs Manager in the Secretariat of FEDIMA based in Brussels. I'm happy to introduce this webinar on behalf of the two organizations, AMFEP and FEDIMA. This joint industry initiative aims at bringing together the insights, best practices, and tools from the producers of enzymes, represented by AMFEP, and the users of enzymes in ingredients for the baking industry, represented by FEDIMA, in order to control dust exposure in the workplace. Our common goal is to help safeguard the health of workers. AMFEP and FEDIMA have been collaborating for years on education and improvement of the handling of raw materials and ingredients that contain enzymes. One of the main outcomes are the industry guidelines on the safe handling of enzymes in the bakery supply chain, which we published together in 2018. And this webinar series that we're organizing is largely based on those guidelines. As you can see in the program, this webinar series is split into 4 sessions, each one addressing specific subjects from the industry guidelines. So we already had webinar 1, as I said, and we are today in webinar 2. We believe that these webinars are relevant for a large target audience in the sector, including SHE managers, WHS managers, or OHS managers, all plant operational staff, R&D employees, but also teachers and program managers in bakery education centers, of course, bakers themselves or bakers union representatives, and also representatives of occupational health and safety organizations. So it's still possible to register for the remaining webinars through our respective websites at AMFEP and FEDIMA. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be used as a tool for continued education. Let me now briefly present AMFEP and FEDIMA to you. So AMFEP is the Association of Manufacturers and Formulators of Enzyme Products. Since its creation in 1977, AMFEP has represented and promoted the interests of the enzyme industry, now equating to more than 90% of European enzyme markets and 80% of the world enzyme market. AMFEP members are producers of enzymes destined to the technical, the feed, the food industry, and through its activities, AMFEP promotes the safe use of enzymes, their sustainability aspect, and their contribution to innovation. FEDIMA is the Federation of European Manufacturers and Suppliers of Ingredients to the bakery, confectionery, and patisserie industries. We currently have 12 members as national associations across Europe, as you can see on the map at the right top. Our members produce a range of intermediate products to bakery and pastry professionals. Hence, we are a business-to-business sector. Our mission is to promote a favorable environment for our sector, which in turn can support a sustainable and innovative bakery industry. As you can see in the blue box, occupational health and safety is one of FEDIMA's 4 key areas of activity. Others are informed customers and consumers in red, food safety in green, and bakery sector promotion in orange. Our collective goal as AMFEP and FEDIMA is to work on the control of occupational enzyme exposure in the bakery sector. We do this by developing practical, user-friendly materials for the bakery sector, which combines the expertise of both of our sectors. We have developed several materials which you see listed on the right side of the slides. So as I mentioned, the guidance document, but also other materials that are available on AMFEP and FEDIMA websites. We will elaborate on these materials later in this webinar and the other webinars. Before we start, a few more words of clarification from our side. The information we will present in this webinar series is furnished for free and based on information that AMFEP and FEDIMA and our members believe to be reliable. It is intended for use by persons having a technical skill and at their own discretion, of course. Since conditions of use are outside of control, we can make no warranties or assume any liability in connection with any use of this information. Nothing in this webinar series is to be taken as a license to operate under or a recommendation to infringe rules. Our materials only address the control of occupational exposure among the workforce, meaning not towards consumers, as this exposure is practically non-existent. Please note that we have used several pictures throughout this presentation, where sometimes brands may be included. We want you to be aware that these are only provided as examples and that, of course, there are other brands or tools available on the market with the same technical functions. So we, as AMFEP and FEDIMA, do not recommend any brand in particular. So in today's webinar session, we will take a more practical look at some of the options for the control of enzyme exposure, which are suggested in the industry guidelines that we have produced. And specifically today for the artisan bakery, and bakery schools and demonstration bakeries. Today's webinar will be presented by Bas Verhagen and Maria Coutinho. After their presentation, there will be time for Q&A. So we would like to ask you to submit your questions if you have through the chat function here in the Zoom software. And we have a user called Q&A. So if you could write your questions to the Q&A user, then we can collect them easily and try to address as many as possible at the end. If we don't manage because of time, we will provide the answers in writing after the webinar. Good, I'll give the floor to Bas then to start.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being with us again today. I am Bas Verhagen, working as the Enzyme Regulatory Affairs Manager, and
I am Maria Coutinho, working as R&D Analytical Manager for Puratos, a member company of both FEDIMA and AMFEP.
In the next 40 minutes or so, we will give some explanations and suggestions on how to limit the exposure to enzymes, mainly via dust control suggestions. The first one is, of course, not to clap your hands to remove powder when they are covered in dust, in contrast to the shown photo, as this would clearly increase dust formation. It is preferred just to rinse your hands underwater. The same holds true for the removal of dust from your clothes. In the interest of time, I will only get to your questions at the end of the session. So in order not to forget, please note any questions you have and send them to the Q&A. In the first webinar, we showed that enzyme allergies can be prevented if the airborne enzyme exposure is in control. To get the enzyme exposure in control, 4 issues need to be addressed: process design and engineering control, work practices, personal protective equipment, and of course, training and education. You can see the first webinar again on the websites of AMFEP and FEDIMA, where the other webinars will also be published. Additional information can be found in the industry guideline on the safe handling of enzymes in the bakery supply chain. On the websites, you can also find safety posters, which you can provide in a visible place in your production area. Our objectives of today's webinar are to consider at every step in the whole process where we can pay additional attention to further control or limit exposure to ingredients, which include enzymes, and how to possibly do this. For this, we will have a look at the whole process, starting at storage of our products via the initial mixing and dough preparation, and even ending up at the waste management. Very importantly, we will also have a look at what to do and especially what not to do when there has been some spillage, as this has a high chance of leading to additional exposure if not handled properly. If you're all ready, let's look at the first step, which is the storage. It is important to use a specific area to store all products which contain enzymes, like bags and mixes. Bags may occasionally be turned or opened during delivery, transport, or before use, which could cause unwanted dust in the storage area. It is therefore important to store all raw materials properly and in a well-organized manner in the storage area, thereby limiting any damage to bags, as can be seen on the photo on the left. If, for instance, the top bag on the left is open or broken, it should be removed from the area immediately and preferably used directly in the production process. Open bags should not be stored in the storage area, as this increases the risk of dust formation. Partly used bags should be carefully closed, sealed, and stored in such a way as to minimize dust formation and avoid spillage. It is recommended that partly used bags are stored in an area where any accidental spillage may be rapidly and safely dealt with, away from the main storage area. It's also recommended that the storage area has proper ventilation, including correct filters. We'll get to the filters later on. Weighing and adding of flour and other dry ingredients together can lead to the formation of dust, especially when used in large volumes or done rapidly and from a height. Flour and other dry powders should not be tipped directly from the bag into the weighing pan, as it is not easy to control the speed of the flow of powders directly from a bag. Instead, it is suggested that a scoop is used to transfer powdered ingredients. And it's further recommended that sufficient scoops are available so that the ingredients may be carefully and gently transferred from different bags into the weighing pan or mixing pan. Please use different scoops for different ingredients as to not mix them. The figure on the left shows the correct practice leading to minimal dust formation, which is in contrast to the inappropriate method shown on the right, which clearly, as can be seen, will increase dust formation. Since weighing and addition of flour and other dry ingredients can always lead to some formation of dust, a ventilation system at the weighing station is recommended. The use of an air local exhaust ventilation system in this area could help to significantly reduce the exposure to flour and approver dust. In order to get the optimum effect of such a system, the inlet to the local exhaust is best placed directly above or just behind the mixing bowl. For preference, the exhaust of the ventilation system should be located behind the mixing bowl in such a way that the air and dust is extracted away from the user. The photo shows good practice of using a local exhaust ventilation system, although as mentioned, it would be more effective to have the exhaust placed at the back, more behind the bucket. Opening and unloading flour and improver bags might be considered as one of the most critical steps in the craft bakery process, during which dust may be released into the environment. If not performed properly, there's a high risk of dust, possibly including enzymes, to escape in some quantities. It is therefore strongly recommended to open bags at the height of the stitching, if that's available, and empty the contents slowly into the mixing bowl. Furthermore, it is advised to slowly lift the bag in order to allow the contents to slide gently into the bowl, thereby leaving less opportunity for dust formation to occur. The height from which the bags are emptied should be as low as possible, preferably directly putting the bag on or in the mixing bowl. As mentioned previously, it is advised to slowly lift the bag in order to allow the contents to slide gently into the bowl. Making a slit in the bag at the opposite end allows a small influx in the air into the bag, which helps the flour to slide out easily without the need to shake the bag to remove all the flour. Where best to make the slit can be seen in the photo on the left top, indicated by the red arrow. The height from which the bags are emptied should be as low as possible. Only if it's absolutely necessary should any knocking or shaking of the bag in order to remove the last bit of flour occur, and this should be done as gently as possible. It is recommended that respiratory protective equipment, also known as RPE, be used during this operation to minimize possible exposure. All ingredients should be added slowly from the bag as described, or by using a scoop to add ingredients if the full bag is not to be added. Any additional dry ingredients should not be thrown abruptly into the weighing equipment or mixing bowl, but should be added gently, as gently as possible to limit the dusting potential. Once all the dry ingredients are added into the mixing bowl, water and other liquid ingredients should be added slowly to the dry blend, preferably along the edge of the bowl and preferably by using a guiding hose, as can be seen on the photo on the left bottom part. This should limit the formation of dust during the addition of the liquids. It will also limit the formation of aerosols, which could also be inhaled. As mentioned, only if absolutely necessary should the empty bags be lightly shaken to remove the last of the powder, this all to limit the dust formation. When removing the empty bag from the weighing device or the mixer, it should be gently rolled or carefully folded to prevent unnecessary dust formation that may be caused by abrupt movements. While rolling or folding, it's recommended that the opening of the bag is directed towards the local exhaust ventilation point, as can be clearly seen on the photo on the left. If performed properly and slowly, dust formation should be minimal, in contrast to what is shown on the photo on the right. Rolling or folding the bags with the opening to the operator should be avoided at all times, as this will significantly increase the risk of dust inhalation by the operator. The bag should be collected in such a way to minimize future handling and dust formation.
There are many different kinds of mixing bowls options, as you can see in the first picture. The ones with a solid cover are preferred to capture any dust that may be formed. When all of the ingredients are added to the mixing bowl, the mixing can start. The greatest concentration of dust is generated at the start of the mixing process. Therefore, mixing bowls with a solid cover should be used to limit the inhalable dust for the employee. Dust formation is further prevented by starting the mixing process on a slow speed. As soon as all the dry and wet ingredients are properly blended, the mixing speed can be increased. If an air ventilation system is present, the local exhaust ventilation point should be placed right above or just behind the mixing bowl, as can be seen as an example in the photo on the right of the slide. Once all the powder and liquid ingredients are properly blended, the mixing speed can be increased. Dusting flour is sometimes used to reduce the sticking of the dough during mixing and for removal of the dough for further processing, but this is not advised, as this will, of course, also increase dust formation. As a better alternative, if appropriate for the specific product and process, a small amount of oil could be added at the end of the mixing process to help to release the dough properly and remove it easily from the bowl at the end. This oil could be streamed or sprayed into the bowl. Once the dough is removed from the mixing bowl, it is common habit for craft bakers to scatter dusting flour over the workbench and the dough to prevent it from sticking to the equipment and benches used. Benches made from materials such as inox, stainless steel, or polyethylene are recommended for dough handling, as they are less prone to stickiness to begin with. The incidence of dough sticking appears to be significantly less with these benches when compared with the other bench materials. In this way, the need to use dusting flour and the subsequent risk of dust exposure are greatly reduced. The use of dusting flour is an obvious source of dust exposure for the operative, and so the amount of dusting flour used and the method of scattering should be limited and controlled as far as possible. High levels of dusting flour not only increase the risk of inhaling flour dust, but may also have a detrimental effect on the dough structure. Accumulations of flour dust are also a hygiene risk. When a machine is used for further dough handling, we suggest that you use a limited amount of dusting flour. Where dusting is essential and no other alternative options are available, low dust flour and dust-free flour should be used for dusting purposes at the lowest possible amount. This type of flour is commercially available, but you can make it yourself very easily by mixing conventional flour with a small amount of oil. This should be done at low speed and preferably with a cake beater to prevent creating dust. An example is a mixture of 2 kilos flour with 15 milliliters sunflower oil. Potentially, this and other alternative formulations could reduce the dust level caused by dusting flour by more than 50%. The dusting flour should be spread as low as possible in the limited amounts, not more than absolutely needed. This should limit the dust as much as possible. We will show you now a video developed by the British Authority of Health and Safety at Work to explain this issue. The following video shows you how effective low dust flour can be.
Apologies.
The risk of dust formation should be assessed for each specific step of the baking process. The use of a respirator, which covers mouth, nose, and chin, is strongly recommended in areas where there is still a high risk of exposure to dust after all other methods to limit dust have been implemented. Preferably, the installation of a professional air ventilation system should be considered first to limit the exposure by all users. A local exhaust ventilation system immediately removes dust particles from the air and is preferably placed close to the points where most of the dust is generated, for example, at weighing and blending locations. More information on the appropriate technical specification for this type of protective equipment will be provided in one of the next webinars. Waste packaging materials, either from normal use of the ingredients as described earlier, or from reclaim operations of bakery ingredients that contain enzymes, should be handled extra carefully to avoid the handler's exposure to dust or aerosol. The best practice is to collect packaging for disposal as soon as the material has been emptied, thus avoiding any handling of packaging again when not needed. For bakery powders, empty paper bags or cartons should be placed into a large polyethylene sack. The neck of this sack should be tied closed when it is full, so no more exposure to dust will take place. Alternatively, packaging can be placed into a ventilated compaction unit, which then extrudes the compacting parts into a closed polyethylene liner. Please be aware that any operator in the vicinity of the compaction unit may be at risk from dust inhalation. Operators undertaking these operations should always use the appropriate respiratory protection, as shown in the previous slide, and as will be further explained in Webinar 3. For liquids, empty containers pose little exposure risk unless they contain sufficient traces of the product to generate spillage, or if they are shredded or compressed. The shredding or compacting of empty containers should be avoided because the forces involved are normally sufficient to generate aerosols, which, like dust, can also be easily inhaled. Care should be taken to avoid the spillage of liquid from empty containers onto the ground or surfaces by ensuring that they are completely drained. Liquid spills should be cleaned up immediately because any dried up residue may cause dust formation if it is distributed. Cleaning will be discussed in the next slide. Third-party waste recycling companies should be informed of the hazards and risks associated with the handling of these empty packaging materials, so they can also take the appropriate measures to avoid the exposures of their employees. Cleanup operations can be a significant source of peak enzyme exposures within the entire bakery chain, which needs to be specifically managed by a combination of equipment and proper procedures. The use of improper or improvised cleanup methods may lead to the generation of airborne enzymes dust or aerosols, which can result in the exposure of operators and bakers in the immediate area or even in adjacent areas via general ventilation. The cleaning up of spilled bakery powder products should be done with the use of a vacuum cleaning system, which needs at least to be fitted with appropriate HEPA filtration. The air inflow and the vacuum tool provide some containment of dust or aerosols at the picking up point. Normal industrial vacuum cleaning systems without HEPA filtration should not be used, as standard filtration systems will not adequately remove enzymes dust and or aerosols before the air is returned to the working environment. This would ultimately only result in finer dust formation in the air, significantly increasing the exposure risk. The contents of the vacuum cleaner must be disposed of in a way that does not generate additional dust clouds. The use of brushes, brooms, compressed air, and high-pressure water must be avoided at all times for cleaning spillages and contaminated equipment, as this will either generate significant airborne dust and/or will generate many aerosols. Moreover, this might leave behind a wet residue, which can be dried out to form finer dust. Vacuuming with a HEPA filter-fitted vacuum cleaner, followed by wet mopping, is the preferred cleaning method. Smaller spillages may be washed to a drain by using a soft or low-pressure water hose, but definitely not by using a high-pressure hose. The use of compressed air significantly increases the risk of dust inhalation. A good alternative to a manual vacuum cleaner system with HEPA filter is a central vacuum system with centralized waste collection and treatment. Regular filter control and a well-considered design are key to prevent any dust formation and the collection bin within this kind of system. Depending on the size of a liquid spillage, the use of a sorbent material may be considered. The contaminated sorbent must be collected and placed into a sealed plastic bag to inhibit further contaminations. These plastic bags or containers should be properly disposed of, for example by incineration or through a waste treatment plant. Respiratory protection should be used for all clinic and spillages operations because the risk of exposure is always high. Whilst the area is being cleaned, it is important to make sure the area is isolated to prevent the risk of exposure to people that pass by and the spreading of these spillage to other areas. In general, and understandably, filtration systems in artisan bakeries and demonstration bakeries are less sophisticated compared with their semi or full industrial equivalents. Nevertheless, the minimum standard of filtration required is also F8, formerly EU8, and in principle, after filtration, the extracted air should be discharged externally from the building to prevent dust formation in the building. Bag, shock, or cartridge-type filtration systems are recommended. The exhaust should be placed in such a way that the air cannot re-enter the building. Older artisan bakeries without ventilation units or modern artisan bakeries where no attention was paid to the implementation of the minimum ventilation requirements should consider the visibility of designing and retrofitting a simplified ventilation unit that meets the minimum requirements. When retrofitting of a filtration system is not possible, the presence of a constant airflow or circulation and air refreshment in the bakery with a maximum airflow of 1 meter per second at ventilation openings is recommended. 1 meter per second is a high airflow to work in. It is therefore also important that the turbulence density is as low as possible, preferably below 30%, in order not to get increased dust formation. Turbulence zones are responsible for higher exposures of particles in the breathing zone, even if the worker is not performing dust-generating tasks. If no other options are available, opening doors or windows can help to prevent high peak exposures of airborne enzyme dust and aerosols, but these recommendations should only be considered as the last resort, if no other measures are possible. When an efficient ventilation system is in place, opening doors and windows should be avoided, as this will change the air circulation. The use of electrical fans, which are generally used to create a sense of chilling in the room for the workers to generate airflow in the bakery, is not recommended at all because fans spread dust around rather than removing it from the atmosphere. This type of air recirculation within the bakery may consequently increase the levels of airborne enzyme dust. It is for these reasons that electrical fans should be avoided.
Before we take any questions, I would just like to summarize this session. Enzymes are valuable and extremely beneficial ingredients for the bakery sector, and I really want to emphasize that they are safe for the user, safe for the consumer, and safe for the environment. All in all, they have a great sustainability profile. However, they can be respiratory sensitizers in the same way as many other proteins present in flour can be, but they are not allergens for the consumer of the bakery products. Enzymes can be safely used, handled and processed by the bakery sector if the best practice guidance is implemented. In short, assess the risk for dust formation for all products containing enzymes, limit the formation of dust by transferring flour and mixes in a smart and gentle way, use ventilation systems where possible, and personal respiratory protection where needed. Finally, consider your waste stream for possible dust formation as well. All the best practices can also be found in the guidance document on which this and future webinars are based. That brings us to the end of this webinar. Of course, it's not possible to cover every conceivable process and task in such a short time, but hopefully what was presented provides a good baseline and has given some food for thought. We hope that this webinar, together with the others, will help you assess your business and working processes in order to limit dust formation. In addition to the guidance document, other information is also present on the AMFEP-FEDIMA websites, as well as on the websites shown here on this slide. This webinar will later on also be available on the AMFEP-FEDIMA websites, so go and have another look. If you still have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to answer them now.
Thank you very much, Bas and Maria, for your presentation. So as said, it's time for Q&A. Give us a few seconds to gather the questions and we'll try to address them one by one. And of course, please write them in the chat if still some questions come up. Okay, we're back. I give the floor to Bas and Maria to hear what we have as questions.
Yes, thank you all for the questions and the participation. It's highly appreciated. One of the questions we've got is, do you always and at all times have to wear respiratory protection when working with products that contain enzymes? The short answer is no, not always. The best thing you can do is assess the risk, see how whatever you are going to do, assess how much dust it will result in. If there's no dust, then it's not necessarily always to wear the respiratory protection. But if, for instance, when weighing flowers, it's safer to use it, as that's one of the times where dust formation can occur. It also depends on how your working space is set up. If you have a good ventilation system, so something that already takes away the air, that will also decrease the risk. So the most important thing is see if there's a risk for dust formation. If there is, please make sure that you wear your respiratory protection just to be safe.
Okay, good. Next question.
Another question we got is, there has been no mention of use of the explosion-proof vacuums. Should this not be considered when working with combustible dust? There was no mention of this use because we are specifically addressing the effect of enzymes in the flowers and in the possible dust. That's why we didn't go into the things like combustible dust. Of course, this is something you have to look out for, but this will be something independent whether or not the enzymes are part. And since we are mainly focusing here on the extra added effect of the enzymes, we didn't look into this.
Okay. Answer more?
Another question we got was, most North American bakeries use cornmeal as anti-dusting agent rather than wheat flour. Besides the difference in particle size, how does cornmeal compare to wheat flour in terms of endogenous enzymes with regard to health and allergy implications? In principle, yes, there might be a difference between corn flour and wheat flour on the amount of enzymes present already in the flour. But independent on this, it would be best practice to deal with them in the same way. So look at the guidance and follow the suggestions there. And just as we've seen in the webinars, try to limit the exposure. If you limit the exposure, you limit the risk. And that is independent on the flour you use. You limit the risk in any case.
Okay, thanks. One more? Two more? We can take more?
Another question that we get is, when using a vacuum cleaner with HEPA filter, is RPA protection still needed during a cleanup of the spillage? The answer is yes, because when you clean, there is always a higher risk of exposure during the cleanup. So therefore, the protection is really necessary.
Okay. Yeah, you can take more questions. So we have a lot, I see.
Yeah, another question that we got also, it's why should the local exhaust be placed preferably behind the mixing bowl? The reason to place it behind the mixing bowl is because by this way you can extract the air from and the dust away from the breathing area of the person.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, there's one more. The question is, can waste bags containing enzymes be provided to any third-party waste companies? In principle, yes. I would suggest, first of all, to warn that company of the possible presence of enzymes so they can take their precautions as well. And if you have really specific questions about your enzyme-containing products and what to do with them, you're best asking your enzyme supplier. They will know all the facts and they will be in perfect position to tell you exactly what to do with the waste and what to look out for.
Okay.
We have one more question.
Okay, yeah.
Are only baking improvers a potential hazard, or premixes with higher doses too? In principle, all the different products containing enzymes might be a potential hazard. Therefore, you have to be careful with all of the products. So make sure you follow the guidelines for all of the products containing enzymes, just to be sure that you limit the risk of exposure. So once again, if you limit the risk of exposure, you limit the risk at all.
Okay, good. Those were the questions so far. I think we didn't get any more through the chat. So I think we close the Q&A for now. But if you still have any questions that come up after today's webinar, you're of course very welcome to send them to us by email, either through AMFEP or to FEDIMA. With this, I would like to conclude today's webinar. So thank you very much to all of you for your participation today. I think we had people attending from different countries in Europe and beyond. So thanks for that. Here a reminder to our next webinar, which will take place on 19th of November at the same time as today. And that will be focused on flour millers, industrial bakeries, and ingredient manufacturers. All other information is still available on our websites. And lastly, a special thanks to our partners who helped spreading the word about this webinar series, which we again provide free of charge on behalf of AMFEP and FEDIMA. So thanks again, and I hope to see you, or at least have you joining the rest of the webinars in a few weeks. Thanks.